From the universe of Operation Safe Place, this is the Soul Tie Saga. Episode 1. The Old Man of the Mountain. The Roman Empire made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had catalogued 712 subjugated peoples, 4 major continental wars, and the names of every god worth taxing. They had measured the height of the world. They had weighed the price of bread in 11 currencies. They had broken the Carthaginians, the Gauls, the Britons, the Egyptians. They had never truly understood patience. They saw a boy with golden curls and Indian features standing in a Cappadocian market square, and they classified him. Provincial Asset Four-Seven-K. Oracular potential. Recommend acquisition. They were wrong. This is the story of how one boy, born under a strange sky during the early years of the first millennium, taught the universe to fear a frequency it had no name for. Cappadocia, the reign of Augustus. A market town 3 days' ride from the nearest legion garrison. The advisor was Aulus Pomponius Niger. He was not an ordinary human exactly. He was a survivor of the empire's middle bureaucracy, a man whose father had taught him that anything unusual was either a tax opportunity or a threat. Niger had been to 12 provinces and seen 16 oracles. None of them had unsettled him. Crispus Flavius Maximus did. The local priests had stopped speaking to the boy directly within the first year of his life. Not from fear, exactly. Niger asked one of them, an old Greek named Demetrios, who refused to elaborate. "He listens," Demetrios said, and would not say more. The boy listened. That was humanity's first secret. We make the impossible happen when we are quiet enough to hear what the universe is trying to tell us. And the universe gets nervous when we do. Niger dismissed Demetrios as superstitious. He filed his report. Provincial Asset Four-Seven-K. Oracular potential confirmed. Recommend acquisition for imperial deployment. The deployment came in the 7th year of Crispus's apprenticeship to the empire. Niger took him to Germania. The campaign was a disaster from the 3rd week. 3 legions caught between forests and barbarian raids, supply lines cut, the local commanders panicking. Niger had brought Crispus on the express understanding that the boy's gifts could be used to predict barbarian movements, to bolster morale, perhaps even to call down portents. Niger had not expected what actually happened. The boy did not predict. He did not bolster. He did not call down anything that could be filed in any imperial register. He raised his hands, on the 4th day of the engagement, in the middle of an open field that 10,000 men were trying to die on, and the sky did something it had no business doing. The Romans dropped their weapons because they had felt their own dead reach back through their hands. The barbarians dropped their weapons because they had seen their dead stand again. For 9 seconds, in a field outside what would one day be called Hanover, 2 armies stood absolutely still, while a 14-year-old boy with golden curls listened to a frequency neither side could hear. Then the boy lowered his hands. The dead did not stay. The campaign was won 3 days later, at remarkable cost. The empire celebrated. Crispus did not. That was humanity's second secret. When we do something nobody else can do, we are the first to understand what it cost. The empire that cheers our victory is also the empire we have just decided to leave. Niger's report on what came next, the only document of his career to survive the centuries intact, was brief. The brevity is itself a record. The boy is no longer cooperative. Recommend reduced deployment. Recommend supervision. Recommend caution. The empire did not heed his recommendation. They sent Crispus to Britannia. They sent him to Hispania. They sent him with the legions to Dacia. Every campaign he was deployed to, the empire won. Every campaign he was deployed to, something arrived back in Rome alongside the legions that nobody could quite name. Niger noticed it. Other administrators noticed it too. The wine in the imperial households tasted slightly wrong for a season after Crispus passed through. The priests of Jupiter reported that their auguries were cooler than usual, less responsive. A senator's wife dreamed of golden curls for 40 consecutive nights, and then stopped, abruptly, after Crispus's 40th birthday. He was studying them. The empire had never made the mistake of thinking compliance was the same as consent. The empire had simply never met a person who could tell the difference. Crispus complied, because compliance let him observe. That was humanity's third secret. When you try to make a weapon out of a person you have not earned, you create a witness. The advisor was 63 when he received the news that Crispus had vanished. There had been a campaign in Mauritania. The legions had won. Crispus had walked away from the camp on the evening of the victory. He had not been seen since. The empire searched for him for 3 decades. They searched through the reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. They searched into the year of the 4 emperors. They searched until the bureaucratic memory of Crispus Flavius Maximus had faded to a footnote in the imperial archives, and then a marginal note, and then a rumor. By the time Trajan came to power, the boy who had won 3 campaigns for Rome was officially classified as deceased, date unknown. Niger had died 40 years earlier. The clerks who closed the file had never met Crispus. They closed it the way clerks close files, with a stamp and a sigh and a thought about lunch. The file was wrong. On a mountain in a place the empire had once briefly catalogued and forgotten, Crispus Flavius Maximus had begun something the empire's clerks could not have filed even if they had known to. He had taken a vow of silence. He kept it for 1,976 years. That was humanity's 4th secret. Our silence is louder than our speech, because our silence is the sound of preparation. The empire fell. Not all at once. Not in any single moment a poet could mark. It fell in pieces, over centuries, the way large things always fall. Administrative collapses, financial defaults, theological schisms, barbarian incursions that became kingdoms that became empires of their own. Rome split into East and West. The West fragmented. The East calcified into Constantinople and held on for another 1,000 years before the Ottomans took it. Through all of this, on a mountain that no longer appeared on any imperial map, Crispus continued his vow. He was not idle. He saw the Tang dynasty rise. He saw the Mongols ride. He watched the last echoes of the Library of Alexandria burn, and made notes, silent notes, marginal notes, on what knowledge had survived the burning and what had been lost. He saw the Black Death sweep through Europe and noted, in a hand that had been steady for 1,300 years, that the disease was riding a frequency he recognized, a wrongness in the chain that connected everything to everything else. The same wrongness he had felt for the first time in Mauritania, the night he walked away from the legions. He had a name for it now, in his own private vocabulary. He had read it for the first time in a Persian scroll, and then again, 200 years later, in a Sufi treatise. The name was not yet ready to be spoken aloud. The name would not be spoken aloud for another 700 years, by a prime not yet born, in a city not yet built. The name was the empathic chain. The disease that wrote it had no name yet. For 2,000 years, Every empire that thought it owned the world tried to find him. Some came close. A Persian emperor in the 7th century sent 500 soldiers up his mountain. They returned. None of them remembered why they had been sent, or what they had been looking for, or, in some cases, their own names. A Mongol Khan in the 13th century rode within a day's journey of his hermitage. The Khan turned back without explanation. His historians recorded that he had received a guest in his dreams who reminded him of business at home. A British Empire surveyor in the late 18th century found the mountain on a map and crossed it off with a note that is still preserved in the Royal Geographical Society's archives. Topographically anomalous. Recommend no further survey. The mountain is not on any modern map. Crispus had not made himself invisible. He had made himself uninteresting. That was humanity's 5th secret. The most dangerous power our species has is the ability to convince a much larger thing that we are not worth the trouble. He could have intervened. He could have stopped the Black Death by walking down his mountain and laying his hands on a single carrier in Genoa. He could have prevented the sack of Constantinople by speaking 3 sentences to one general. He could have ended the slave trade in 1700 by appearing in the right room at the right moment with the right book. He did none of these things. His journals, recovered partially and integrated into the Citadel of Hope archives in the modern era, explain the refusal in a single line, written in the year 1534 in Latin that has been translated and retranslated. To save one age is to lose the next. I am keeping my hands clean for the storm I was born for. That was humanity's 6th secret. Sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is refuse to help, because the help they could give now would consume the help they will need to give later. He was fighting time. He was outlasting empires, outweighting prophecies, conserving a power that would not crystallize into purpose until a single afternoon in late October 1989, when an 11-year-old boy with a Nephilim gene named Abd al-Matin walked up his mountain looking for a teacher. The boy did not know why he had climbed the mountain. He had walked, on instinct, for 3 days. He had no provisions and no plan. He arrived at the hermitage at dusk on the 4th day, and he stood at the threshold without knowing what he was waiting for. The old man inside the hermitage looked up from the journal he had been writing in for 300 years. He looked at the boy. He stood. He walked to the threshold. He took the boy's small hand in his very old one. And, for the first time in 1976 years, he opened his mouth and spoke a word. Stay. The boy stayed. That was humanity's 7th secret. When we wait long enough for the right person, our patience becomes louder than any prophecy ever spoken aloud. Across the world, things shifted. The Benevolence Corporation's Deep Space Sensor Array recorded an unidentified frequency anomaly originating from Earth at 0843 UTC, October 12, 1989. The anomaly was logged, classified, and, per protocol, dismissed as a sensor error. The sensor was not in error. In a sterile laboratory not yet built, a young David, also not yet born, would one day inherit the dimensional research that this moment had quietly perturbed. He would call himself, eventually, by another name. In a hospital not yet broken ground, the woman who would one day be Lucille Yuki's mother was 3 months pregnant and had just felt a flutter against her hand that she did not yet have the language to recognize. In a jump ship drifting between dimensions in a year that for human clocks had not yet happened, an artificial intelligence called Chen AI had a subroutine flicker, a single half-second hesitation in a data stream that had been steady for centuries. All of them noticed. None of them yet understood. That was humanity's eighth secret, and the one the antagonists of this saga would spend the next 50 years failing to learn. When a human has been preparing for 2 millennia, the moment they begin to act is not the beginning of something. It is the end of every plan their enemies have been making since they first noticed our species existed. In late October of 1989, on a peak that does not appear on modern maps, an old man with gray hair combed in an early 20th century British style stood at the edge of his hermitage and looked east. He had taken in a student. The student was 11 years old, asleep in a cot behind him, wrapped in the old man's spare cloak. The boy did not yet know what he was. He did not yet know what his teacher was. He did not yet know that, in 11 years, he would not be the only prime in this teacher's care. Crispus did know. He had known for centuries. He stood at the edge of his hermitage and looked east, toward a hospital not yet built in a country whose new name he was already practicing in his thoughts. Athera. He had learned it from a scroll he had not been ready to read until 1923, and had finished translating in 1971, and had then waited 18 years to act on. The wind on the mountain was cold. The boy slept on. The empire was long dust. He allowed himself then, for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, a single soft second sentence, spoken aloud. Soon. Welcome to Operation Safe Place, where humanity's longest patience outlasts every empire that thought it owned us.